I'm Bill Brocktrip, Artistic Director of Antaeus Theatre Company, and welcome to the Antaeus Book Club. In this chapter, you are in for a treat as we have Antaeus founder Dakin Matthews talking with former co-artistic director Kitty Swink about King Lear. This is a production we did in the summer of 2010, and Dakin played King Lear, sharing the role with Harry Groner. And as you know, Dakin is an expert in Shakespeare, and this is a fascinating conversation. So sit back and enjoy.
Before we jump into Kitty, who will be leading a conversation with Dakin, we'll go through our little slideshow to get us all on the same page. I imagine with this particular play, most people have seen it or read it at some point, but just to get us set up. So Isabel, if you'd like to share that. So here are, just to start, some photos from the Antaeus production some years ago. So just for a little background, Shakespeare wrote King Lear in the later years of his career. While there's no confirmed date when Lear was written, it's thought to have been composed sometime between 1603 and 1606. Stationer's Register entry notes a performance before James I on the 26th of December in 1606. Play is based on various accounts of the semi-legendary Brythonic figure Lear of Britain. Shakespeare's most important source is probably the second edition of the Chronicles of England, Scotland, and Ireland by Raphael Holinshed, published in 1587. Besides the subplot involving the Earl of Gloucester and his sons, the principal innovation Shakespeare made to the story was the death of Cordelia and Lear at the end. During the 17th century, Shakespeare's tragic ending was much criticized, and alternate versions were written by Nahum Tate, in which the leading character survived and Edgar and Cordelia were married, despite the fact that Cordelia was previously betrothed to the King of France. Tate's version held the stage for almost 150 years until Edmund Kean reinstated the play's tragic ending in 1823. About the play, an aging monarch, a kingdom broken, and a family lost to love, the blindness of sanity and the clear-eyed vision of fools and lunatics, fathers, sons, and daughters drenched in the storm of life. Lear, the aging king of Britain, decides to step down from the throne and divide his kingdom evenly among his three daughters. First, however, he puts his daughters through a test, asking each to tell him how much she loves him. Goneril and Regan, Lear's older daughters, give their father flattering answers, but Cordelia, Lear's youngest and favorite daughter, remains silent, saying she has no words to describe how much she loves her father. Lear flies into a rage and disowns Cordelia. The King of France, who has courted Cordelia, says he still wants to marry her, even without her land, and she accompanies him to France without her father's blessing. Lear quickly learns that he made a bad decision. Goneril and Regan swiftly begin to undermine the little authority Lear still holds. Unable to believe that his beloved daughters are betraying him, Lear slowly goes insane. And just a bit about Dakin. Dakin Matthews is the co-founder and first artistic director of Antaeus Theatre Company. He's made multiple appearances on Broadway, including To Kill a Mockingbird, off-Broadway, Shakespeare in the Park, as well as over 200 regional performances at theaters such as Center Theatre Group and the Old Globe. He has been in over 25 films, including Lincoln and True Grit, and over 250 episodes of television on shows such as Desperate Housewives and Gilmore Girls. He's also an emeritus professor of English, former Juilliard instructor, Shakespeare scholar, and award-winning playwright, translator, and dramaturg. And so with that, I will hand over the conversation to Kitty and Dakin.
Dakin, thank you for being here tonight.
Thank you, my pleasure.
Yay. So why don't we just jump in? You played Lear one other time before you did it at Antaeus, yes?
I did, yes, I did. It was, I think it was right back, I don't remember the year. It was, I could look it up, but I'm not going to. I had never made up a bucket list for myself. And I think I had just turned 65. And I decided I would make up a bucket list. Finally, I would say, okay, I don't want to die unless I can play these 5 roles. And this one was at the top of the list. And like 2 weeks later, somebody called me who I did not even know and offered me King Lear in Pittsburgh. And I thought, this is some sort of sign. So I took it. And like after that run or before that, I forget what it was, somebody else I did not know called me and offered me another one on my bucket list, which was Big Daddy. So I took that. And that's when I started going back out of town, because I was only working in LA and New York and San Diego at that particular point. So I thought, there's 3 more to go. I haven't got them yet, but we'll see what happens. But this was, yes, it was at a theater called Pittsburgh Irish and Classical Theater, which still exists, run by somebody different now.
Mm-hmm.
And it performs on the campus of the university in Stephen Foster Hall, I think it's called. And it was really a surprisingly wonderful production. The theater put together a really good cast and had a nice director, and we had a really good run. And actually, Nikki Dukas was rehearsing at the same time that I was running. She was rehearsing the next play there, an Oscar Wilde play. So there were.
Nikki and Leo worked there a lot, I think. Yeah.
Yeah. And then when Antaeus decided to do it some years later, Harry and I double cast or partner cast the role. Yeah.
I have to say it was a powerhouse pair of guys playing that part. Is Gloucester one of those parts on your list? Because I know you said you haven't played
No, I've never played it. I would like to play it, but it's not, I don't even, something, I'm getting so old now, I can't even remember what the other 3 are. So I guess I won't die disappointed. I won't have remembered that I didn't do it. So no, Gloucester was not, though I would love to play Gloucester. There were a couple of opportunities where I might have, but it didn't work out. It's a lovely role too. One of my favorite Gloucesters, of course, I've seen and worked with Richard Easton when he did it.
Mm-hmm.
But when I was a young 26, 25, I think, I worked with I guess I was 28. I worked with the 26-year-old David Ogden Stiers doing his second King Lear, and Michael Keenan was his Gloucester.
Michael Keenan.
Yeah, the late Michael Keenan, who was also an Antaeus, was his Gloucester. It was a wonderful production, yeah. I played Cornwall in that one, I think.
Wow. So let's talk about the first scene of the play, because you.
Well, yeah, that is, opening scenes of plays for Shakespeare as he moved on are extremely critical. And it is my minority belief that this play is misrepresented and misunderstood in almost every production and almost every scholarly work that you see about it. And that's based on how I read the very first scene of the play, which is not the court scene, but it's the pre-court scene. So if you have your books, let's just get that thing out, that first scene, and talk about it. And remind ourselves what we think the play is about. The play is about an aging king who somewhat feebly decides that he's going to retire and divide his kingdom equally among his 3 daughters based on a test he gives them as to who will tell him that they love him the most. And you can divide it into 3 equal parts. Almost everything I've said in that sentence is not true. That is not what happens in the play. That's commonly what people think it is, but that's not what happens. And to show that it's not what happens, we'll look at the very first scene. Just the very first 2 speeches. The Earl of Kent, first of all, 2 people walk in, we don't know who they are. I always want to pretend like I don't know the plot of this play. By the way, there was an earlier version of King Lear written by somebody else, where Lear's name is spelled L-E-I-R. And much of the plot Shakespeare sort of cannibalized or colonized and used for this play. And I'll talk about that other King Lear in a bit. But 2 obvious noblemen come in, attended by a 3rd person. We don't know who any of them are. So you start with a blank slate. One walks in and says, "I thought the king had more affected the Duke of Albany than Cornwall. Okay, so you know that in addition to these three people standing on stage, none of whom you know, there are three other people backstage or somewhere else in the world, a king and two dukes named Albany and Cornwall. And the speaker says, I thought he liked A better than B. So now, you know, the audience starts to process information. This is going to be a play about a king who has two dukes, one of whom everybody thinks he likes better than the other. Okay, so that is what I call slot and fill. So there's the frame, there's the slot. That's the first slot that the audience gets. And they're going to figure, okay, I'm going to eventually see this king. I'm going to eventually see this duke and this other duke, A and B, or A and C as we can call them. And I'm going to hear something about some sort of competition between them, because he walks in saying, I thought he liked A better than B. When somebody walks in saying that, you know, in fact, that he doesn't like A better than B, or that he's given proof that he doesn't like A better than B. You know, he is suggesting a contrary to fact situation, that something just happened which makes the first speaker confused. I thought he liked A better than C. And the other guy, again, whom we don't know, says, yeah, I thought so too. But it did always seem so to us, says Gloucester. But now, in the division of the kingdom, it appears not which of the dukes he values most. Well, okay, what do we learn? What do we hear here? This king has divided his kingdom. It's a done deal. In the division of the kingdom, it appears not which of the dukes he values most. Why not? In other words, everybody thought he was going to treat A better than C, but he's treating them the same. And he goes on to describe, what does he mean by the same? For qualities are so weighted that curiosity in neither can make choice of either's moiety. That's a little dense for us because we don't know what those words mean. Moiety means your share or your portion. Qualities means everything about that thing. And weighed introduces the idea of balancing things to see which one is heavier. And curiosity is a very odd word here. For us, it means one thing. For Shakespeare, it meant something quite different. It meant over-precise and over-linguistically detailed legalisms, like fine print. Like if you were trying to figure out, get the exact wording for something, for fine print in a contract, or the codicils of a law, and you got it down to the finest, most arguable point you could, that was called curiosity. Curiosity means, remember when Hamlet says, you know, if you think about it, Julius Caesar is stopping an ale barrel. Julius Caesar died, Julius Caesar turned to dust, dust turns to mud, mud turns into loam, you take loam and you make cork out of loam and you stuff an ale barrel with that. So Julius Caesar, and Ratio says, that's to argue too curiously. That's to have a really weird way of thinking that it doesn't seem reasonable. It seems overly detailed and overly convoluted, basically. So what he's saying is the best lawyer in the world with the biggest magnifying glass and the best knowledge of legalisms could not determine whose size is bigger. In other words, it's the old, I cut, you choose. When you're trying to divide something in half, One person cuts, the other person chooses. That makes the person who cuts be as good, as precise as possible. So what exactly he says that? Curiosity in neither. Albany could hire the best lawyers in the world and examine this down to the smallest molecule, and he still wouldn't take the other guys, wouldn't think the other guys was bigger. So Lear has gone to such trouble to make sure that the two things are exactly the same, the two parts that he's divided. So far, we only know that it's divided in two. That's what it sounds like so far. And they're exactly equal, in spite of the fact that the king had expressed over the long time his preference for one of the guys. This is not particularly a sign of feeble-mindedness. This is the sign of intentionality. He's being extremely careful. That's what they're talking about. Wow. Even I thought he was going to, weigh, put the thumb on the scale for Albany. But he is being so careful to make sure that they both get exactly equal parts. This isn't a guy in the first stages of dementia they're talking about. This is someone who is crafting something down to the finest detail. And that's just so what do we know? Okay, there's been a division. There's two guys in the running, one of whom Lear likes, one of whom he doesn't like as much, but he's treating them absolutely equally. Boom, that's what the audience knows. Now, suddenly they change the subject. Oh, is this your son? His breeding, sir, hath been at my charge. I have so often blushed to acknowledge him that now I'm braced to it. So in front of this guy, this young boy, these two old men, we still don't know who they are, talks rather casually about his own son's bastardy. And jokingly. He's very proud of this boy, but this is kind of embarrassing a little bit. And the sort of sexual innuendo of the lines continues, breeding, blushing, I cannot conceive you. This young fellow's mother could, whereupon she grew round-wombed and indeed had a son for her cradle, ere she had a husband for her bed. Do you smell a fault? I cannot wish the fault undone, the issue of being part. But I have a son by order of law, some year elder than this, who is yet no dearer in my account. Ooh, interesting. Now we're introduced to two more people, two more males of different qualities, and a father who says they're exactly equal in my affection. This is so carefully setting up both plots and the theme of both plots. How a parent lets his affection for, in Gloucester's case, his two offspring, who are quite different, how he tries to make his affection equal. And then this king with these two dukes, who, as far as we know, could be his two sons. Who knows? We don't know yet. So this goes on. We don't have to worry about the rest of that scene. But now, in comes, the one thing that's fortunate is we finally get some names. Edmund. We find, oh, the boy's name is Edmund. Oh, the first speaker's name is Kent. We still don't know who the other speaker is yet. Fortunately, in walks the king, turns to the guy whose name we don't know, and says, attend the lords of France and Burgundy, Gloucester. So now we know the three names of the people that started the scene. We don't know the name yet of the king. And we know there are still two more guys out there, Burgundy and France. And also the stage pretty much fills up with people. It's possible that Shakespeare's audience would have recognized the level of a duke by their dress or by some model. So they may think, oh, those are the dukes. But we never heard anything about girls in the first scene. Nothing. We thought this was going to be about dividing the kingdom between two guys. Now suddenly three girls come in, and two of them seem to be with two of the guys. So, you have to go imagining that you don't know anything about this play, and only gradually are you being given information. But the first information you got was the kingdom is already divided, and the king is doing it with great precision, with great care, and there are rivalries around here which the older generation are trying to keep a damper on. I don't want either of my two sons to think that I love him less. I don't want Albany and Cornwall to think that I favor them less or more. And then the king comes in and says, meantime, we shall express our darker purpose. Our darker purpose. Well, if you're an audience member, you're sitting there thinking, well, what does that mean? How can a purpose be darker? Well, he's got something that he hasn't told everybody. It's not about the division of the kingdom, apparently, or about Albany and Cornwall, because Kent and Gloucester know all about that. They know there's a division of the kingdom. They know there's some, careful thought going into it. But there is a darker purpose somewhere. There's something that probably everybody else that just came on stage doesn't quite know. They don't know what he's talking about. In other words, he calls, I want to have a big family meeting. It's going to be about, I'll tell you what it's going to be about. And you'll probably guess what I'm trying to set up my will. I'm finalizing my will. In fact, I have a darker purpose that I'm not telling you about. Give me the map there. Ooh, wait a minute. There's a map on stage. We didn't hear about that. So what would a director do? He would probably put the map into Gloucester and Kent's hands in the first scene, because they're saying, yeah, but look, the pieces are pretty much the same. They're pretty equal. So that's one way a director sort of deals with that. But there is going to be a map. There is a map. And then he starts, know that we have divided in three our kingdom. And suddenly the audience's brain has to go, I thought it was two. Now it's three. Well, wait a minute. All I know is that Albany and Cornwall are getting equal parts. What's the third part? Is that equal to the other two? We didn't hear that. We heard that two of them are equal. We didn't hear him say, and all three parts are exactly equal. They didn't say that. So now, and then he announces, I'm going to retire. I'm going to get young people to take over some of the burdens of rule. And I'm going to unburden, crawl towards death. Our son of Cornwall, and you are no less loving son of Albany, we have this hour a constant will to publish our daughter's several dowers, that future strife may be prevented now. Again, this is planning. When I die, there's going to be at least two, maybe three people in line for inheritance. Primogeniture is not necessarily in effect now. This is early England. So it doesn't necessarily go to the oldest. Also, he has no sons. So it can't go to the oldest sons. There aren't any. So he says, I know that when I die, there's likely to be a fight over who gets what. So it's an inheritance play, it's like the Arthur Miller play. It's an inheritance play. Who gets what? So I'm going to prevent that. I'm going to settle it right here. Now, this kind of sounds like, was this the darker purpose? Or is this, in fact, what everybody sort of thought the meeting was going to be about? We don't know that. But it makes sense. It's not crazy. In fact, it's far from crazy. And he says to Cornwall and Albany, I'm doing this because I don't want you guys to fight. And we're going to publish our daughters' several dowers, meaning each of their individual, but it's more than one and probably more than two. Then he goes on, the two great princes, France and Burgundy, great rivals. Okay, so we got rivalry between Cornwall and Albany. We got rivalry between between France and Burgundy. Great rivals in our youngest daughter's love. Okay, so now the audience figures out, oh, those are his three daughters. And the one who's not with a guy is the youngest one, and she's unmarried. Long in our court have made their amorous sojourn, and here are to be answered, or answered. So I'm going to settle all three dowries, two of which, since you're already married, probably have been clarified, but let's make it absolutely sure. And one of which will be used to determine who's going to marry the third daughter. Now, in the original play, this whole thing was staged to force Cordelia to marry the one the king wanted her to marry. That was the premise of the scene in the original King Lear play that Shakespeare did not write. In other words, he set up a test. Okay, who loves me best? Figuring Cordelia would say, I love you, but you love me enough to do whatever I tell you? Oh, sure, absolutely, Daddy. Then you marry him. That was the original premise of the love test in the original play that Shakespeare knew and perhaps may even have acted in at one time. So here he says, okay, now he says, tell me, my daughters, since now we will divest us both of rule, interest of territory, cares of state, which of you shall we say doth love us most, that we our largest bounty may extend where nature doth with merit challenge. Nature meaning how I feel about something, merit how I ought to behave. So each of you tell me which of you loves me best so that I can apportion the parts of the map based on your answer. We know this not to be true. He's already divided up between Albany and Cornwall and made their pieces exactly the same. So the audience must know, or should know if they're paying attention, this isn't a love test. He's already made the decision, at least according to these two guys. What's going on? And they probably know it. I mean, how many secrets can you keep in a court where it's all family? So they probably know it. This love test is not a real test. He is not going to apportion the parts on what they say. He's going to apportion them on his prearranged plan. What is his prearranged plan? Well, then we go back and we look at the stage direction before Lear comes in. Enter Senate, it means a little horn. Enter one bearing a coronet. Then Lear, Cornwall, Albany, Goneril, Regan, Cordelia, and attendants. So somebody comes in with a mini crown. Then the court comes in. And there's that mini crown. See, now a mini crown, a coronet, is specifically the crown the deputy wears, the vicegerent wears, the substitute, primary substitute for a king when the king is away wears. That's a coronet, not a crown. That's what a coronet is. And there's only one. There's not three. I may divide the land, but there's only one coronet. And that's important. So now we begin to understand what his plan is. And as soon as he says, well, you're the oldest, Goneril, you talk first. She gives her little flattering speech. Cordelia says, oh God, what am I going to say? And the king gives her land. Not possible if it's a true love test. He said, I'll wait to hear who loves me best, and then I'll decide on the division. He hears one and makes a decision. So everybody should know by now it's a sham. He is not going to divide his kingdom based on who says she loves him best. That's simply not true, and he is not feeble, and it's a game, and they all know it's a game at this point. When he divides it up after one speech, they all sort of go, okay, I get it. This is a ritual we're going through. This has nothing to do with how the land is going to be divided. And the two sisters are standing there probably going, and we damn well know who he's going to give the third part to. And what does the third part consist in? Well, Albany is north, Cornwall is south, more south. In between them must be Cordelia's piece. And that's the seat of government. And that's, we find out later on, he intended to retire, yeah, but put Cordelia in charge of running the whole kingdom, even though there were duchies. There were 3 duchies, but she would be in charge of the whole kingdom. And he was going to be there while she ran the country, just to sort of make sure that everything was copacetic and everything was fine. We know this because when it all goes wrong, when she won't play the game, which he set up precisely to make her queen, he flips. He goes ballistic. And to show that he did not make an original mistake in the way he divided the kingdom, the mistake comes from his anger, his old age, his great plan has been destroyed by this girl that he built the whole plan for. He says to Cornwall and Albany, divide the coronet between you. So the crown was going to be the symbol of a unified central government. And now he makes the critical mistake. He divides not just the land of the kingdom, he divides the ruling of the kingdom into 2 places, and that can never stand. If dividing the kingdom in 3 was horrible from the outset, Gloucester and Kent would have said so. They have no problem with dividing it in 3. In fact, they think the king has actually done a pretty good deal on this one. You know, more rational and more cleverly than we would have thought. It's not dividing the kingdom in 3. That's the tragic error of the play. It's abandoning his original plan in a fit of anger and refusing to follow through with it. So that's what I mean when I say that the play, you get actors who want to play King Lear senile from the very beginning. You get actors who want to play the idea of dividing the kingdom as something horrible, disastrous, impossible to overcome. And that's simply not it. That's not it. If in my book, he comes up with an extremely workable and brilliant plan, and it's just his daughter's stubbornness and refusal to play by the game, because the game involves quantifying love, and she doesn't believe that. Now, it's not just that she can't find the words to say. See, that's what you always hear, because she can't find the words to say how much she loves him. It's that she doesn't believe that either. As she says, I can only love you as daughters love fathers, as Desdemona says in Othello later. When I get married, I take some of my love to my husband. You can't have it all. And she says, why are my sisters married if they love you all? In other words, you can't do that to love. You can't quantify it in such a way that it's a zero-sum game. You either get all or none. And if anybody takes any love, then you got that much less. You can't do that with love. So she's rebelling against the terms of the game, not against the terms of the plan. And maybe she's a little stubborn. Maybe she's like her father. Maybe she's a little, hard-willed and independent and not to play along. But I think if the play starts there, not with Lear senile, not with Lear insane, not with Lear not knowing what's going on. I saw a production one time where everybody announced the arrival of the king, big trumpet, and he wandered in from the wrong door and didn't know where he was. And you kind of go, oh, really? That's not it. No, that's not it at all. No. It's much more interesting if the plan is great and it falls apart because he's too old and too angry to see it through to the end. So, wow, that was a long introduction, but that's my introduction to the play.
It's terrific. Thank you. So I've
Oh,
always.
by the way, just so that you know, when the time comes for the two suitors to come in, we also know which one he was going to marry her to,
Mhm.
because he says, Burgundy, you want this piece of trash? You can have her. Then he says to France, I wouldn't insult you by offering you this girl. So clearly the plan was not only to make her Queen of England, but to marry her to the King of France and unite the two kingdoms, which was always the great goal of English foreign affairs, to unite the kingdoms of the thrones of France and England, which Henry V managed to do for about 3.5 years until his son, the baby son, ascended the throne, and it was disastrous. Yes, okay, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to.
No, it's great. And so I've always thought Cordelia was her father's daughter.
Oh, yeah.
Um, and you kind of said why you think she says what she says, but why is Cordelia, as sharp as she is, and she's clearly quite sharp, why does she make
Why
this?
won't she play the game?
Mhm.
I don't know the answer to that. I don't know the answer to that. There are some people who think that the answer she gives is the one she that she thinks her father would like the best. See, I'm not going to flatter. But you have to remember that flattery in old monarchs was like the traditional weakness. That living in a bubble and being surrounded by people who always say, you're right, you're the best, you're the greatest, was thought to be the greatest danger that kings have in their lives. So that she has misjudged his vulnerability to flattery in that regard. And she's determined not to flatter. And later on, when he's half mad, he recognized it. He says, I was surrounded by people who said yes and no to everything I said yes and no to. That was not a good way to do it. I understand now. They told me I was everything. Not true. I can catch a cold. So that's one explanation, is that she thinks that she is being asked not to flatter him, possibly. Possibly she thinks she's giving a great answer. Possibly the whole thing kind of, the idea that she's going to inherit the crown and become the queen over against her two sisters, I don't know what she feels about that. Maybe she feels it's not fair. Maybe she feels it's unworthy. Maybe she feels like there's something smarmy about this. I don't want it this way. I don't know. That's the mystery that the Cordelia has to resolve in many ways. But part of it is she is presented quite frequently throughout the play in words that one would apply to a saint or to Jesus himself or to the Redeemer. Somebody says she redeems the curse that two have brought us to. Someone says about her, which sounds like this is Christ coming after what Adam and Eve did. I mean, there's deliberate echoes of biblical stuff, and she's associated with holy water. Her tears are like holy water. So maybe she is too pure to play the game, rather like Isabella in Measure for Measure, too pure to be able to deal with compromises and realities that are in life. So that's another possibility. But yeah, that's up to the Cordelia to figure out, I think. I can't help you out with it. Not that she doesn't love her father the most. Not that he doesn't love her the most. They know it. The girls know that. Mm-hmm. But the girls do help us. After it's all over, Regan and Goneril do have a conversation about him and say, well, he was never totally conscious of who he was, and age only makes it worse. Mm-hmm. He was never quite as reflective as he should have been. And as he gets older and older, he's going to get a little bit more and more stubborn, more and more unpredictable. And we're going to have to start correcting him the way you correct babies. Well, although the spanking will be rather more vigorous than with the baby. But you can't do the flattery stuff anymore. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't think the flattering thing is just a problem with old kings, by the way.
Old rulers, the bubble. And the bubble is something else we can talk about too, but later on, because that is an interesting for me, one of the other things that's interesting about the play is you think the primary progress that these two fathers will make is, oh, I was a fool. I believed the wrong one. And now I believe that the other one is clearly the good one, even though he never said it, which is the prodigal son story. To a certain extent, the one I cast out, or the one that went away, is the one who does good for me. Or the parable of the two sons. A father had two sons, and he said to the one son, do this. And the son said, yes, father. And said to the other son, do this. And the other son didn't say, yes, father. But the yes guy didn't do it, and the no guy did do it. Which is the better son? That's a gospel parable that Jesus tells about the two sons. So these gospel things are sort of sitting in the background of this play, even though it's set in pre-Christian times. He is using the audience's knowledge of biblical parables, for example, or biblical stories, to feed their understanding of the play. But that we would think will be the primary psychic movement of the two old men. I get it. Yeah, I let them flatter me. I let them deceive me. I should have known better. Now it's the other one I trust. But both of the old men also have another awakening, that they have lived in a bubble all their lives and have thought that all was well in their kingdom. King Lear said something. He says, the poorest beggar is in, the meanest thing, superfluous. He's got everything, Even the poor people in my kingdom are well off. Then he goes and has to live among the poor people. And he looks around and says, I was wrong about that. They're not doing very well. I should have taken care of that. And Gloucester has the same thing. They both talk about superfluousness and superfluity. They both say, ooh, when you're rich and you have power, you just don't know how bad it is for some people in your kingdom until you are humiliated down to the level that they're at. And then you say, I didn't do a very good job with this. Things are not well in my kingdom. The poor and the outcast and the unprivileged are being punished in my kingdom for things that they didn't do. There is not justice in my kingdom. So those who live in privilege and in that bubble of privilege where they tell themselves, I'm really a good king here, I'm really a good ruler, find out that that is not true also. And that's the sort of social as opposed to the familial awakening that both the old men have, which is kind of interesting.
So Cordelia and the fool are never on stage at the same time, really. And when he comes in carrying Cordelia in his arms at the end, he says, my poor fool is dead. And he rather specifically doesn't tell you, directors make decisions about what happens to the fool, but he rather specifically doesn't write it into the text of the play. What do you think happened to the fool? Are they the same? Are they
I don't particularly believe that the same actor played those two roles. It's done frequently. It was done in the most recent Glenda Jackson King Lear on Broadway, which in my opinion was pretty horrible, to be frank. But anyway, because we know who the fool was. It was a man named Robert Armin, and he was not a young boy. He was a playwright of his own, and he had a particular kind of wit. And Cordelia would have been played by one of the boy actors. Mm-hmm. So it's extremely unlikely that the same actor played Cordelia and the fool, even though they never appear together on stage. And in every production I've ever seen, the fool, unless they're doubling the fool in Cordelia, the fool does appear in the first big court scene. They just bring him in silently as a witness to it all. So I don't think so. And I don't, Lear is in his second, what do they call the second, what do we call the COVID thing? The first wave, the first
surge.
Lear is in his second surge of madness by this time. When he has his big surge of madness, then he has his moments of clarity, and then with the death of Cordelia, he has his second big surge, which kills him. So that fact that he says, "And my poor fool is dead,"
He does. They are the two people who always tell him the truth and
Yeah.
are kind at the same time. Yeah.
Yeah. So they are clearly allied. And of course, the idea of Christianity that it's the foolish who have the wisdom and not the smart, which is a very Pauline theory of, and it's the outcast that Christ hung around with all the time, not the elegant people. So that the idea that the fool could be a representative of that side of wisdom or of Christianity, that his loyalty, which he says, which is foolish, but only fools should take that advice. Yeah.
Here's a big question, and because we've been going for so long and it's pretty great, and I want to let people ask questions soon, other than mine, but why does Edmund repent? I mean, it's at the end, at the very end of the play, he has this enormous
Conversion.
Yeah.
Well, I think that it not only it's conversion, it's actually a by the book conversion. In Christian theology, in order to have a conversion, you have to go through steps. You have to see that what you did was wrong. You have to feel bad that you did it. You have to accept a punishment for it, and you have to try to make it right.
Mm-hmm.
So you have to have contrition, sorrow, and purpose of amendment. Those are the three from our Baltimore catechisms, Kitty. Those are the three stages of repentance according to Catholic theology. Confession of wrong, sorrow, acceptance of penance, purpose of amendment. And Edmund quite carefully goes through each one, so that Shakespeare is saying something that this is a true repentance. This is a true confession. He, the most despicable character in the entire play, is capable of trying to save himself at the end. So not only do innocents get murdered horribly, but villains get saved unexpectedly and unfairly and unjustly. And Shakespeare is saying, yeah, that's how it works. You think it's horrible for an innocent to die. It's just as horrible for a villain to be saved. That's horrible. I mean, he dies, but he dies oddly in some sort of state of grace, as we call it, because he confessed, he was sorry, he accepted the punishment, and he tried to make it right. So it's weird. It's totally. So I think behind this play and a number of other plays, somebody else has to go through the same thing. Leontes has to go through the same thing. The question of not only why do innocent people suffer, but why should we forgive bad people, are two sides of the same coin in many ways in Shakespeare's Christian humanism. And he won't explore the one without exploring the other. He won't, because in earlier versions of the play, like in the earlier version of the play, which I talked about as the source for this play, Cordelia was saved. He was saved.
Right.
Shakespeare's the one who kills her. So he's going to reverse the dynamic of the original story on purpose, and then say, and you should feel sorry for that really awful person there too, who killed her. You should feel sorry for him. You should want him to go to heaven. This is sort of the Flannery O'Connor theory of Christian grace. That's
for you, Al.
You are a good, upstanding, fundamentalist Christian, and the least deserving person you meet will be in line to the pearly gates in front of you. Basically, I remember I wrote a play one time where a character says to the other, think of the most despicable person you can think of, the absolutely worst human being in the world. And then not him, everybody goes him, everybody says Hitler. Now imagine that they go to heaven and you don't. That's what Christ demands of you. I don't want him.
And he sort of gets to that in The Tempest. He has that moment with his brother. And
he gets to that in The Tempest, and he gets to that in Winter's Tale.
Yeah.
And he gets to that in Cymbeline. What's the last couple of lines of Cymbeline? Pardons the word for all. Pardons the word for all. That forgiveness, because we share a common flawed humanity, is the only salvation you're going to ever get in this life. Is the only answer you're ever going to get is forgiveness. It's kind of interesting.
Even Goneril
Challenging,
and
even challenging.
even Goneril and Reagan have sort of an 11th hour oops. Yeah. So people always think that this is the big mountain for an actor to climb. And we had a conversation a couple of days ago, and you said I didn't think it was.
I didn't find it that way. I don't know why. I think partially because I have studied this place. It was the subject of my never finished doctoral dissertation. I've dramaturged it a number of times. I've worked on it a number of times. I've seen it umpteen times. I've written about it a lot. So I understood everything pretty much that was going on, anything that I was saying. I think sometimes a thing can be very difficult if you really don't know what it means. And so you're constantly trying to untie the knots even as you're speaking it. So I didn't find that to be a problem. And I didn't find I did a couple of weeks where we had double shows on the weekends. You do one King Lear at 2:00, and then you lie down, have a piece of pizza, and do another King Lear at 7:00. I was younger then. I don't think I could do it now. Just physically, you'll have to get a very tiny Cordelia if you want me to do it now. My first one was indeed, she weighed about 75 pounds, I think, but we had some sturdy Cordelias at Antaeus, I have to tell you. We had some pretty sturdy girls there, but I insisted on carrying her in, even though I had a bad back and bad leg. But I don't know, as I think I told you, right after that, I got hired to play 3 roles in Hamlet outdoors in Washington, D.C. The ghost, the first actor, and the gravedigger. And it was outdoors in 100-degree heat in a 5,000-seat amphitheater. And it was a revival of one that had been done indoors the previous year. And the costumes were all built for indoor performance. They were thick, heavy, gigantic costumes. And they were in a period that was like perpetual winter, basically. And to top it off, the mousetrap play was done as a kabuki play. So you also had to do thick kabuki makeup and those heavy kimono sort of things, wigs, all that kind of stuff. And I was playing the ghost, the first player in the gravedigger. I had 9 costume changes. My dressing room was 2 flights of stairs away. It was 100-degree heat, 5,000 people. And about halfway through the run, I said, oh, let me do Lear again. It was much easier. All this running up and down the stairs and changing costumes and working in an overheated, big, gigantic, bulky costume with all kinds of makeup on my face. Please, somebody hire me to do Lear again. It's so much easier. So I have not found it a mountain. And I am a strong believer that you go full out. Nowadays, it's become very popular to whisper the storm scene. I saw a couple of actors pretty much whisper the storm scene. That I didn't. As those of you who were there and had your eardrums pierced, I didn't whisper anything. So we were in that little tiny theater too. So
it was little tiny, but it was big during that show.
That was awesome. Thank you, Dakin Matthews and Kitty Swink, for this deep dive into William Shakespeare's King Lear. And thank you all for joining us for this chapter of the Antaeus Book Club. Please check out the rest of our videos and join us again. I'm Bill Brockdrup. Thank you.